All right, welcome everybody to the Messengers podcast. I am Chris Searles, and with me today, as I was going to say as always, but it's not necessarily been as always, is Rob Seifert, our creative director here at Searles Graphics.
How you doing?
Today we are talking about a topic. It's a little uncomfortable for me to talk about. Really, I would consider this maybe one of my biggest failures in my professional career. And it's a little uncomfortable because I usually just don't like to dwell on that kind of stuff. I like to learn from it and move on and move forward and just try not to make the same mistakes twice. But this was I think it's kind of important. I think it's important, I guess, in terms of maybe who our audience is and, people that are trying to grow and build their businesses and, either learn from the mistakes that we've made and don't make them yourself, or maybe understand that it's okay to make mistakes and to fail and, but again, learn from it, move on, move forward and take it from there. So, this was a magazine that we attempted to publish from the ground up. We, I guess, a little background, a little backstory is we had a client who came to us who was looking to publish a magazine, and they had a very specific distribution that was valuable, and it was a good idea. I mean, I still stand by the fact that idea certainly could work, should work.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a good idea. But this particular client ended up kind of a long story, but we ended up getting stuck for a lot of money. We were doing the printing. I don't think we were doing the artwork on that one, right?
No,
we were just doing the print.
No, we were doing the
art.
We
were doing the art too.
Yeah, we did the whole thing.
Yeah. So they were they were publishing it. We were printing and designing. And we got stuck for a lot of money, somewhere in the range of 50,000 plus, that it was the owner of the business ended up getting indicted by a couple of federal agencies, and it was kind of an interesting time and an interesting story in and of itself. But when that kind of went away, we believed in the idea. It's one of the reasons why we took the work on initially. I mean, we did it for maybe 2 years or so before it went bad. But
we were friendly with the company that was distributing the magazines too. They were a client of ours, so it kind of lent itself to the relationship.
Right, and the distribution was everything. I mean, that was the whole product was based on the distribution, and so I kind of made the decision that I wanted to try to do it ourselves. I kind of figured we had sales staff in-house, we have printing capability, we had the design capability. How hard could it be to
we were doing about
do the rest?
Well, 75% of it seemed, right?
Yeah.
At the time, we just needed writers and,
Yeah, just needed to produce the publication itself. So we made the decision to take it on. We worked out with the company where the distribution was happening, worked out to just kind of fit right into that slot and take it over. And things were going well. I mean, at the beginning they were going well, and I really kind of, I guess, the first mistake that we made, which didn't ultimately, I guess, cost us all that much, because our target, really my target for it, was 3 years, start breaking even by year 3, and then hopefully turning a profit,
which is
beyond
realistic.
that.
Yeah.
And we did that. We hit that target by year 3. We were breaking even, and it was going pretty well. But I would say, kind of even before we got to that point, I think the first mistake that we made was, right when we decided we were going to do this, I think it was somewhere around like December, January of whatever year it was, we hadn't really flushed anything out. We didn't have ad pricing. We really hadn't come up with much more than, hey, we're going to do this and try to launch by the summer. And we had somebody who kind of right away said, I want the back cover. I want the first 5 back covers. I'll take it. And I guess my inexperience in the publishing industry, I didn't know what that really meant. I knew we had a good product, and and we kind of sat on it for a little bit and said, okay, well, we're not really ready, and we're still working. We don't have any ad pricing yet. We don't have anything ready to go, but stay tuned, and we'll get back to you. And it was a couple months until we kind of got all of our stuff together. And so I would say, mistake number 1 was not saying, okay, great, writing up a contract and coming up with a price then and there and saying, okay, here you go, we're in, and we'll figure the rest out later.
Right.
So I guess takeaway number 1 from this episode is, if you have the sale, take it, as long as you can fulfill it. I mean, there was no, it wasn't like we were taking money and then worried that money was going to have to go into production and it would disappear if we failed to do anything. We weren't going to ask for a check until we were ready to go anyway. It was just signing a contract and getting it done.
Sure.
We should have gotten it done everything we had to do, dropped everything, and just said, okay, let's get it done.
Right.
So I think that was certainly, mistake number 1. And then realizing after the fact, once we had a little more exposure in the industry. And again, I think some of it comes with having some experience in it and knowing, we have another product that we sell where we sell all the advertising and do all that. And
sure.
Having done that for so long, we sell our back covers and we do that, but not knowing that most of the time in publishing, a lot of times you're giving your back cover away as an upsell to get somebody on a long-term contract or,
right.
But I just kind of assumed, well, no, it's a valuable product. We, and you're just kind of validating what we're doing because right away it was somebody that wanted that, and there's going to be more people out there, even if that goes away. And then it took us a while to get back to that point where we had created that demand for a premium spot like that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, just thinking back to when we first started the project, I think that, when we talked about this subject, I kind of titled it The Mistakes Confessional, where we were both in production on this project, for years. And, we put a lot of effort into it. And I think back to the beginning of it when we did start it and we got geared up. And like I said before, I think we both felt we had about 75% of it under control. We just had to figure the other 25% out. But there was a lot more to it than that. And part of it initially, in my opinion, was the staffing here in our office. I mean, we don't have a huge staff, and we were already staffed to do, commercial print and web production and all sorts of marketing services. And then we were taking on a publication. And I think we underestimated the amount of time it would take to do it. And I felt that at times we really didn't allocate enough of our manpower and time to it. And at the time, it was new for us. And I'm the kind of person that kind of just says, okay, we're going to buckle down and get this done and make it happen. But at that point, it probably should have been a conversation that I initiated with you and said, okay, we might be biting off a little more than we can chew in terms of production. And that and that's kind of a regret I have, is that I couldn't have that honest conversation with you at that point and say, we really have to reapproach this and take a different look at it so that we have the manpower to do this thing the right way.
Yeah. And I think some of that goes to our approach to the whole thing, which was we kind of figured we're not going to have to sink a lot of money into this. We're going to have to put time, it's going to be time and effort. And we might have to float, paper costs and things like that. But as long as we have time on a press, sure. It's not like we're not taking on work to get this done in production. And the same thing in our art department, right? Was if we have the time in the art department to get the artwork done, it's not costing us anything. Where we should have not applied that philosophy was one in sales. We kind of figured, well, we have a sales staff that's already doing, some ad sales. And we kind of figured that would just naturally lend itself. And especially because the the target for that sales effort was a lot of the people that we already do business with, and we kind of took it for granted, or at least I took it for granted a little bit, that I thought we had our I guess our reach was a little deeper than it really was in terms of how easy it would be to sell, um, based on the infrastructure that we had in place and based on uh, our existing client base.
Right.
And really, what we should have got into it with was knowing that this, from a sales standpoint, should have been a completely separate sales effort in and of itself. That, there should have been somebody who was dedicated to selling that product and making it successful from that standpoint.
Right.
And I think, again, a lot of that comes down to, and it kind of touches then on another point of failure that I think you kind of alluded to a little bit, is, this was years. I mean, I think it was 6 years that we worked on the
Right.
publication for. And like I said, for the first 3, everything was on target. We were, we obviously made some mistakes and learned, but we got there. And then what happened was something that, and I think it's weird how this kind of came about. And I think it's, I had planned for the eventuality that we would lose the distribution that we had. And the kind of from day one, I knew that that product, the way that we were initially selling it, was based on that distribution. If something happens with that, it's gone and we lose everything we've invested. So from the beginning, was kind of planning for that and hedging against that eventuality. So when it happened, because the distribution wasn't going the way that we wanted it to, and we felt like we were then selling a product to our advertisers that we couldn't deliver because the distribution wasn't being done the way that it was supposed to be getting done. And I was spending, 2 days a week just trying to make sure that it got distributed properly and those issues were taken care of. And it just wasn't happening, and it started to erode our relationship with our client, who is still a good client, and we still have a great relationship, but it started to negatively affect that relationship. And so kind of mutually agreed that, hey, this is not working, and we just got to kind of call it quits.
Right.
Really, at that point, looking back on it in hindsight, should have known, well, that was the product. And if that doesn't exist, the product doesn't exist, and we should just throw in the towel and say, okay, it didn't work. But instead, because I had kind of planned for that and expected that it may happen at some point in the future, took it on and said, okay, well, I've been planning for this and worrying about it happening, and understanding and trying to come up with a way to adjust and pivot if it happens. So now we just need to implement those plans. And then really we lost everything that differentiated us from every other publication that was doing the same type of thing that we were doing. And that should have been the key. It should have just been, okay, well, it failed, and let's cut our losses and move on. And instead it dragged on for 3 more years.
Right.
And
I think that's the point. Exactly what you're saying is that distribution method distinguished the publication, and without it, we became the same as any other publication that's distributed in this area, and it's much more competitive.
Right.
And it doesn't distinguish us.
And I think we tried to convince ourselves that we weren't the same, because we in reality we weren't. I mean, it was we didn't just do the same stuff everybody else was doing. And we tried to reach a different market. And when we did, I mean, the readers loved the publication. There was the readership wasn't the problem. It was convincing the advertisers that the readers loved the publication.
Sure. Right.
And again, which kind of comes down to not really having the sales staff to really kind of back that up. And then again,
tell that story, right?
And really looking at it and saying, well, once we lost the distribution that we had and that differentiating factor, really you're kind of looking at, now we're starting over from ground zero again, and we didn't really approach it that way.
Right.
You know, we kind of said, well, we're still doing the same thing. It's just the distribution's a little different, and we might cover a different area. And
Well, the
you know,
focus of the magazine did change a bit. Once,
geographically, yeah,
right, once the
yeah,
right with our advertising
hmm
efforts with a lot because of the distribution change. But again, I mean, looking back at that point and when that happened, I mean, if we're talking about mistakes again, uh, when it came to my attention that the distribution was going to be different, uh, I neglected to give you my true opinion on it. And now that we've worked together many more years, I'm usually pretty upfront about
yeah.
things. But at that point, I considered having a conversation with you about it. That in my opinion, that I feel the effort might have been wasted
And
at that point.
and in all honesty and fairness, I probably wouldn't have listened to you.
True, but at least if
You
I would
know,
have.
I mean, because and again, that's and certainly, I mean, I was wrong.
Hmm.
You know, and in my head, it was, well, I planned for this.
Hmm.
You know, so we can make it work. I can make it work,
Right.
and really, and a lot of it came down to not wanting it
Mhm.
to fail.
Yeah.
I didn't want it to be a failure. I didn't want it to fail. I wanted it to be successful, and I
Right.
believed in it. But I should have been
Yeah.
big enough or strong enough or whatever it would have taken for me to look at it and say, okay, well, it failed.
Yeah.
It's just not going to work. Let's cut our losses and let's move on to something else.
I think at the time also the redirection of the magazine geographically and the overall idea of the magazine was shifting. I mean, I had some previous publication experience, working on an East End publication for a few years, and I understood that market
Hmm.
much better. It was more of a high-end Hamptons East End market, and at the time I felt that was kind of the direction we should take with the magazine too. And it shifted a bit from there. Um, and again, I can't remember particularly how emphatic I was about my thoughts to that effect, but again, I'm the kind of person that says, okay, Chris has a different idea about this. Let's give it a shot his way and see how it works. But just truly not understanding that commitment to that big of a change, would affect the publication so greatly.
Yeah. Well, and from that standpoint, our kind of approach to it was uh, as a point of differentiation was not to, we were so the publication was
Right.
distributed primarily through like the Hamptons in that market, but not to be, because there's a new publication that gets launched almost every year out in the
Sure.
Hamptons, because it's just people that want to capitalize on money, on the money that's out there in the summer.
Hmm.
And so what we tried to do was focus more on real people, and
Right.
and the real people either that live there year round, or that come out, but they go out into that area not because they're billionaires and
Right.
just have a place where they want to be secluded from everybody out in the Hamptons, or where they want to show off how much money they have.
Right.
But the people that go out in that area because they love the area, because it's a
Yeah.
nice place to be.
Yeah. Not a luxury market.
Right. And, and that was really, and it doesn't mean that there wasn't, that we weren't targeting readers who had money, or, had, you live in Manhattan and have a summer home out in the Hamptons, or even if you can afford to rent a place for the summer out in the
Right.
Hamptons, you're doing okay. So it wasn't that we weren't targeting those people for as readers. It was more that wasn't the focus of the magazine. It wasn't about high society.
Right.
It was targeted towards just real people and regular people and things that were going on, nonprofit organizations, stuff that was going on in the area.
Hmm.
And that's why, kind of to your point, when it came time to pivot, we didn't pivot into, okay, well, now we're just another publication that's in that area. We kind of said, well, let's take our editorial focus and maybe geographically shift into a more underserved market in terms of
Hmm.
the type of publication we were producing and where it was going. But again, the whole reason we got into publishing was because of the distribution that we had. That was it. Otherwise, we would have never thought about just starting a publication.
Right.
And that's where I feel like, I always love the saying, fail early, fail often. And we failed on both of those counts because we didn't fail early enough to even have enough attempts at other things.
Hmm.
Not that we've not failed at other things, or I've not failed at other things since then or before that, um, but it went on for too long. We should have thrown in the towel and just kind of said, all right, well, we tried it, didn't work,
Right.
and let's move on and let's do something else.
Yeah. Well, that's hard to do sometimes. I mean,
It's
it's
really
on
hard to do.
us.
It's
Yeah.
extremely hard to do. You put a lot of effort into something like that. And like I said, I mean,
Mhm.
it was 3 years. It'd be one thing if it went 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, and right away it just was not working at all. But it was working. I mean, we were
Right.
where we wanted to be after 3 years. But then there was a major change, and
Hmm.
I made the mistake of trying to pivot instead of throwing in the towel when we really should have thrown in the towel.
Right.
You know.
Right. Well.
That's and I think the undercapitalization part of it is important too. Where we kind of assumed we had everything we needed
Hmm.
to make that business work. And
Right.
really, that's what it was. It was a completely different business. It was a new business, and I think when we see issues with either clients or new businesses in the area and people that are trying to start something, I think undercapitalization is probably the biggest factor in terms of businesses that succeed or fail.
Right.
And sometimes it goes the other way. I mean, we had I can think of one. I'm not going to call him out by name, but one notable client where you know the guy spent money and he knew he was not worried about every dollar and cent, knowing that he was investing. I mean, he was investing, but really the idea was just not a good idea. And that's
Right.
kind of
Yeah.
so we've seen it the other way too. But I think the most common area of failure that we see is undercapitalization, where you just don't know what it really takes sometimes to make something like that work. And a lot of times it's either maybe it's a side gig to start and somebody that's trying to build it into something that can be a full-time business where
Right.
if you don't have money or time, you kind of need one or the other. You can't
Sure.
really it's hard to make something work really well without without one of those things.
That's the investment. Right.
Yeah. But and I think that was an issue for us too. Like I said, where there should have been some dedicated staff on that particular product, and we just kind of figured, well, we have a little bit of extra time here and there,
Mhm.
and I, for me, figured, well, I can work as many hours as I need to work. I
Sure.
mean, as long as
Try to do it yourself.
and so that's fine, and I'll do that. And I mean, I edited it. I
Right.
did ad sales. I managed the whole thing. I mean, I've learned how to be an editor.
Hmm.
I wrote.
Mhm.
I did write. That was really when I started writing. I mean, now I try to write a good amount for my blog and our blog and all that kind of stuff. And but that was the first time I started really doing any of that stuff. And just kind of figured, okay, we'll make it work. But
Right.
there definitely should have been some dedicated resources to just that business as well.
Right. Yeah. We definitely needed help on that end.